Kia ora whānau, my name is Paula Penfold. I'm an investigative journalist with Stuff, which was until a couple of weeks ago. Fairfax, we've just rebranded. Good to be here. So great to see so many of you here. Thank you very much to Global Women for the invitation to speak on Pressing for Progress. It's something I feel very strongly about. And I would also like to talk about something that, forgive my crassness, I would like to call no bollocks tonight. I hope you might see where I'm coming from soon. In January, I went out for lunch with 9 women, and we are all journalists, or had been. We'd worked together at TVNZ, and I left TVNZ 15 years ago, and we have literally been trying to organise this lunch and go out together, us 9 women, for 8 years. We finally got there in January. We were pretty excitable, it has to be said, and that wasn't just the bubbles. An hour before we got to lunch, our Prime Minister had announced she was pregnant, which was pretty cool, right? And so we were excited about the kind of hashtag future is female idea. So there was a lot of conversation going on around this table. It was also one of those situations, and you women and men would know what this is like, where you haven't seen each other for 8 years, but you're talking like you saw each other yesterday. And it was some tricky stuff. There was some tricky stuff to talk about. One of us was dealing with a father who has Alzheimer's. Another had just had a major career change because of a serious issue at home. And my marriage of nearly 22 years had just broken up. So we all talked, and this bunch of interesting, courageous, interesting women asked some questions and listened, talked in a non-gossipy way about what we were all going through. And I loved it, because afterwards there was a Facebook Messenger chat, as you do, about how good that was for the soul. And one of the women said what she loved about it was that there was literally no bollocks, which is why I want to talk about that stuff tonight. Around that table, I did the maths on it, and it was something like, over 200 years worth of journalistic experience at that table. We've all worked for all of the mainstream media companies in New Zealand. And one of the issues that we face as an industry in journalism and media, and there are many, many, many issues in our industry at the moment, but one of them is pay parity, and all of us around that table had experienced it. I know myself that there have been jobs in the past for which men doing exactly the same job, or even a lesser job, have been being paid more than me. And I know that not because there's any great process of transparency, but because when you have a discussion, some men will tell you what they're getting paid, and you're like, what? Many of you might have experienced this, and that is an issue facing my industry. And actually, it is increasingly facing my industry as my industry becomes more dominated by women, as more and more young women come through journalism school. So it's not just an issue of pay parity anymore, it's also an issue of pay rates dropping as the gender structure changes. So where I am now, Stuff, I'm loving it, because for many reasons, one of which is that the CEO, Sinead Boucher, is a woman, and she is a very progressive employer. The executive team, the senior leadership team at that company is 50% women, and you can bet that that trickles down to us journalists at the coalface on the newsroom floor. One of the things that I also love, speaking of that progressive employer idea, is that they are currently in the process of a full-on forensic investigation into pay parity within the company, which I'm excited about because it acknowledges that there probably is a problem. I mean, what company in New Zealand doesn't have a problem? Let's face it. And so they are crunching the numbers, going through all of the data to find out how big that problem might be. Then they can analyse what caused that problem, and then they can figure out what they can do to fix it. So when I talk about being a woman at the coalface of journalism, and that sometimes that can present some issues and some problems, hell yeah, it does. I mean, there have been things. I'm sorry to say that I don't know a woman in my industry who hasn't experienced a problem in terms of being a journalist, a woman journalist. But I have noticed in the past week, and I think it's about to get a lot worse, the kinds of things that we suffer as women journalists. And this is off the back of an investigation that I'm very proud to be associated with, and that is the Me Too NZ campaign, which was launched by Ali Moore last Wednesday. And within, seconds or minutes of this campaign being launched last Wednesday night at 6 o'clock, the trolls came out to slay us. I have a great deal of respect for Ali for doing what she is doing. It's hard work, and she has put a lot of processes in place. How this evolved was that she saw what happened after the Weinstein allegations, and the movement of Me Too was launched and Time's Up last October. And she looked around the world at what was happening, and she looked at an investigation launched in Australia by the journalist Tracy Spicer, and she waited for one to happen here in New Zealand. And nothing coordinated happened. There's been some really, really great work around incidents at the Human Rights Commission. You've all seen the stuff about Russell McVeigh, but there hasn't been a coordinated outlet through which women and men who have suffered harassment, sexual harassment in the workplace across every industry, not just media, not just law, but across every workplace, can come and tell us their stories. So I'm a consultant to that investigation, and I'm really privileged and honoured to have that role. And we had a meeting this morning just to see how it was going in terms of people's stories coming into us. 220. It's not a big country. 220, it's not even a week. And some of those stories are heartbreaking. Some of those stories are extraordinary, and they are devastating for the people who are involved in them. And so we've got some serious work ahead of us. But, I talked about the trolls. Then the biggest troll of them all came out last week. I got sent this link, and I thought, I don't want to click on that, I don't want to give that a click. But I had to read it. It was Mike Hosking writing on whatever, on the NZME website, but I presume he'd also said this on News Talk ZB. He headlined it, Fairfax's Me Too campaign, tasteless, tacky and tabloid. So he's the clickbait guy, right? He accused us of launching this for clickbait. I don't really want to give it that much oxygen in a way, but it's context about the kind of things that we'll be facing. He called it tabloid news at its worst, masquerading under the blanket of a good cause. 220 cases, and that's in a week. If the patriarchy had a payroll, he would be on it, wouldn't he? And he would be earning 12% more than any woman on the payroll, because it is exactly the kind of thing that they don't want us to do. He went on to say, so you ring the hotline and dob in the pervs. Their crack squad of journalists will investigate and bring to justice those who so richly deserve to be outed, shamed, and presumably destroyed. Cool, he wrote. Not thinking about those women and some men whose lives have been destroyed. One wrote to me about losing her hair because of the sexual harassment that she went through in her workplace, the complaints that she made, and the lack of process that has been implemented as a result of what she went through. But he's worried about the men whose lives might be ruined. So, hearsay, rumour, innuendo, scuttlebutt, pinched bums, and wolf whistles. That's what he wrote we will be doing. Well, I'd like to assure you, in case you might be worrying about the same thing, that's not what we will be doing, and there will be lawyers all over this. We won't get anything to print until we can prove its veracity. Nobody will be in the headlines unless they've done something that makes them deserving of being in the headlines. So the trolls come in, and I don't bother, it's too energy sapping really to bother reading most of them. But before I blocked one of them, he said, I read this of Ellie and I for working on this investigation. He said, you're both attention-seeking whores, which is always the word they use, isn't it, when they don't like the status quo to be challenged. And they do that because they have no substantive criticism that they can make of what we're doing, so they have to make it personal, which is really reminiscent to me, for me. I worked for 5 years on the Taina Porter investigation, and we were campaigning for his innocence, right? He'd been in prison for 20 years by the time we met him. It was a long, hard slog of investigative journalism. And one commentator wrote that I was doing that work because I was infatuated with, and I quote, the convict. It's the kind of stuff that we cop as women journalists. They try to trivialise and minimise what they do because they don't like what's in the message, so they personalise it against us. But the reason I do what I do, the reason I do this job is because of one of the fundamental tenets that I hold very dear about the role of journalism, and that is to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. And that is what we will be doing with this Me Too NZ campaign. Now, the no bollocks thing is precisely what this is for. And in case you think I've wandered off topic, I don't think I have, but I'm going to wrap it back up with the fact that, of course, this is inextricably linked with what happens in the workplace in terms of pay parity, isn't it? It's not a great leap. The kinds of power and practices that are at play that means that sexual harassment can go, unreported, unpunished for decades, are exactly the same kinds of power and processes at play that mean women earn substantially less than men do. So I do get this sense, gosh, it's 30 years since I did women's studies, but I do get this sense that there is a revolution starting in terms of Me Too and in terms of time's up, in terms of pushing for progress. I do get this sense that change is underway, which is why I'm so pleased to see you all here, because I think it's beholden upon each and every one of us to be a part of that change and to make that change unstoppable. Thank you.